Hi, everybody. Brad Truex here from Eastman's Woodlands and Wildlife Committee. And today we're going to talk about rabbits and hares. You've often heard us mention rabbits and hares in some of our previous presentations on wildlife here at Eastman. Unfortunately, it's often because they're the unfortunate dinner of a predator of some sort. So rabbits and hares are not rodents. They're actually lagomorphs, but they have many features in common with rodents, and some people actually consider them to be rodents. Lagomorphs are distinguished from rodents because they have two sets of upper incisors, while rodents usually have only one set. And in New Hampshire, we have two types of rabbit, the New England cottontail and the Eastern cottontail, and one type of hare, the snowshoe hare. Actually, we probably have very few rabbits in Eastman and not too many snowshoe hares either. Rabbits and hares may superficially resemble each other, but there are big differences. Hares are born fully furred with their eyes open, and they're active within hours of their birth. But rabbits give birth to blind, hairless young that require considerable attention during their first few weeks of life. Compared to rabbits, snowshoe hares have a larger body, longer ears, and much larger feet. And rabbits need dense new growth forests, where snowshoe hares can rely on dense conifer or softwood cover in a forest. Rabbits live in burrows or warrens, but snowshoe hares don't dig burrows or nests. They use natural shelters like depressions, and they'll rest under branches or bushes in the forest. And the big difference is that when faced with predators, hares will escape by outrunning them, whereas rabbits, because they're smaller and less able to run rapidly, tend to seek cover. So why are there so few rabbits and hares at Eastman? Well, clusters of tree saplings and sprouts are necessary to provide abundant food and shelter for rabbits as well as other wildlife. And these areas provide essential cover from predators, and the buds and twigs serve as food sources. And more mature forests had made this habitat disappear. And Eastman's forests, unfortunately, from that standpoint, are extremely mature. So eastern cottontails are able to venture farther from their protective cover while remaining able to spot and evade predators. And that's because they have slightly larger eyes and sharper vision. That trait probably arose because eastern cottontails evolved from more open grassland habitats where detecting predators at a distance was really necessary for them to survive. So again, rabbits and hares are active all year long, and they need dense young forests and shrublands. Clusters of tree saplings and sprouts, again, are necessary for both shelter and food sources. And these areas provide essential cover from predators. And once again, the buds and twigs serve as sources of food. The New England cottontails generally don't go farther than about 16 feet from their protective cover of thickets and brush. And more mature forests have made this habitat largely disappear. Hence, New England cottontails in New Hampshire have greatly diminished as our forests in general have aged. And eastern cottontails now actually outnumber the New England cottontail in New Hampshire. And you're much more likely to see a pet rabbit than a wild one here in New Hampshire. So the New England cottontails are now largely confined to the southeastern part of the state, mainly the seacoast region. And they're typically about 15 to 17 inches long and weigh anywhere from 1.5 to 3 pounds. And they have a brown and gray coat that doesn't change color with the seasons. There's a black spot between the ears and a black line on the leading edge of the ears that can help distinguish them from eastern cottontails, but that's not always present. The New England cottontails are active year-round, mainly at dusk, dawn, and at night. And in the summer, they feed on grasses and forbs, and in winter, they feed on bark, twigs, and the buds of shrubs and young trees. By the way, forbs are simply grass-like plants that tend to flower. The New England cottontail breeds throughout spring and summer, and sometimes into the fall. And they may have 3 to 8 young in a litter, and they may have 2 to 3 litters per year. And New England cottontails are legally protected here in New Hampshire. Some rabbits will live 4 to 5 years, but the average life expectancy for rabbits typically is less than a year. It actually averages about 11 months. So where do rabbits live? Rabbits, particularly the New England cottontail, tends to live in underground burrows called warrens. And these are large, complex tunnel systems with multiple entrances. And when they're not in their burrows, they tend to hide in brushy fence rows, field edges, brush piles, or gullies. And they seldom wander very far from their burrows. The eastern cottontails were not native to New Hampshire, but they've now actually outnumbered the New England cottontails as the number of the latter has dwindled. Eastern cottontails are a little bit bigger than the New England cottontail, anywhere from 14 to 19 inches long, and they weigh 2 to 4.5 pounds. They tend to have a white spot on their forehead. Their fur is either reddish brown or grayish brown, and they have larger hind feet, long ears, and a short, fluffy white tail. The underside fur is white. And these cottontails don't dig burrows. Rather, they tend to rest in shallow depressions, in a clump of grass or under some brush. And they prefer areas where they can be out in the open, but be able to hide quickly. And they may occasionally use the dens of groundhogs as kind of a temporary home or during periods of heavy snow. And they, again, like the New England cottontail, are mostly crepuscular, meaning at most active at dusk and dawn, or they're nocturnal. Rabbits' ears are important. They're important for sensing nearby predators. That's probably the most important thing. But they're also important for thermoregulation. As you can see, there's a vasculature inside the ears. And what happens is that the rabbits can limit blood flow to their ears to prevent heat loss. So if they're out in winter, they will constrict these vessels, and that leads to less heat being lost through the ears. But in the summer or whenever it's hot, they can actually increase the blood flow to the ears, and that allows heat to dissipate. So very important, not just for sensing predators, but for thermoregulation. Uh, this is an extremely important reason why we don't have a lot of rabbits and hares here at Eastman. The young forest in the foreground is really the kind of habitat that's needed by rabbits. So you can see that this is mostly low foliage, low, very dense foliage, and we don't have a whole lot of that here at Eastman. Again, these are dense clusters of tree saplings and sprouts. And again, here, this provides not only food for the rabbits, but also shelter from predators. And here you can actually just see the little head of a rabbit sticking out there. So he's very well hidden from predators. And again, the older forest in the background is not particularly good habitat for rabbits, particularly the New England cottontail. So, what do rabbits eat? They're strictly herbivores. Their diet is high in fiber, mostly in the form of cellulose. And they graze on grasses and they consume nearby vegetation and other plants, including leaves from trees. And this is important. Rabbits have very sharp incisors on both jaws. So when they're browsing, they leave a clean cut. Okay, and you can see this on the left, as opposed to deer browsing, which tends to leave these sort of ragged edges. So the right image, again, is from a deer. The left one is from a rabbit. So the right one shows a shredded sort of pattern, and that's from the deer. Now, snowshoe hares are more common in more northern New Hampshire. And again, they have very large hind feet and their toes spread out like a snowshoe. That's why they have their name. And that really allows them to hop about in deep snow. They have a brown coat in the summer, but it turns white in winter. And the typical habitat for them is lowland spruce fir forests with dense softwood understories and a mix of hardwoods, and that makes an ideal habitat. And they generally avoid open areas. And unlike rabbits, they don't dig burrows or build nests, but rather they use natural shelters like depressions, or they tend to rest under branches or bushes. And snowshoe hares require dense, brushy, usually coniferous cover. So again, that's probably why they're a little more frequent here at Eastman compared to rabbits. So low brush provides hiding and thermal cover when it's cold out. And they need about 3 feet of cover to protect them against terrestrial predators, but they also need about 10 feet of protection to protect them against avian predators like owls. So again, snowshoe hares, big ears, big feet. Those hind feet are big, they're spread out, their toes are spread out, and there's lots of fur there. And that helps them be able to hop easily on top of the snow. And from this photo, picture how its tracks would look. The rear paws, which would move forward, are going to always appear first, and then the front paws will appear later. But the front paws will be separated in the pattern. That's important in distinguishing it from tracks left by squirrels. So again, here, I've mentioned before that in wintertime, the two most common tracks we see in the snow, aside from those left by dogs, are those of hares and squirrels. So we need to be able to separate them out. These are hare tracks. Once again, the hind paws will show up front, and then the front paws show up behind it. And typically, there's a vertical separation between the front paws. So again, often that classic image that we're seeing nicely here may be obscured as the snow is melting or some tracks are overlapping. And you'd be surprised how often when we're out following tracks, suspecting a different animal, we ultimately find out that it really was hare tracks that were somewhat obscured in the snow. So this is the hare tracks versus squirrel tracks. So again, over here on the right are the squirrel tracks, and you can see that even though the hind feet show up out here, and the front feet actually show up behind, squirrels have parallel front feet, as opposed to the rabbits, which have this vertical separation between I'm sorry, these are hare tracks, snowshoe hare tracks, and there's a vertical separation between the two front teeth. And that actually makes sense. If you think about it, a squirrel likely has front paws that are going to be next to each other, because squirrels do what? They climb trees. Okay. Snowshoe hares don't climb trees. Okay, so again, squirrel front prints are side by side, whereas the hare front prints are slightly off. And again, remember, in these patterns, the front feet are actually behind the back feet. So again, rabbit scats consist of small dark pellets. This is rabbit scat over here, so it's considerably smaller than deer scat and much smaller than moose scat. Rabbits and hares are active all winter long. The rabbits tend to shelter in underground dens that are lined with grass, straw, and some twigs. And you may actually be more likely to see them in winter because they have to spend more time outside looking for food. And they need to find some plants that are tall enough to rise above the snow in order to eat. And as we mentioned before, rabbit hare tracks are probably the most common tracks you're going to see in the snow here at Eastman, other than dog tracks. We already mentioned that the snowshoe hare's coat turns white in winter to help them hide from predators. But the cottontail rabbits stay brown, so they have to find thick brushes or evergreen trees or solid fences, anything else where the predators can't easily see them in order for them to remain safe. And snowshoe hares grow more fur on their paws in the winter, and that also helps them walk on top of the snow. So color changes in winter. The color of many animals' fur changes in winter, and the snowshoe hare here in summer has a brownish gray color, but in winter the snowshoe hare turns white, and that white fur helps protect them from predators. But if there's no snow, they actually might be more easily seen in winter. So again, here's a snowshoe hare that's very well camouflaged against the snow. You can barely tell that snowshoe hare is out there. But with climate change, we've greatly reduced the number of days with snow cover here in New Hampshire and New England in general. And picture what this snowshoe hare would look like against a dark background. He'd actually be much more easy to see and now much more vulnerable to predators. Well, there certainly are a lot of predators for rabbits and hares. The average lifespan of rabbits and hares is less than 2 years, and it's largely because they're a key part of the food chain. And unfortunately for them, they're at the lower end of the food chain. So common predators are bobcats, lynx, fishers, coyotes, foxes, owls, hawks, mink, weasels, even snakes, and of course, cats, dogs, and humans. Uh, so again, these animals have excellent vision and excellent hearing that helps them avoid predators. And when they're confronted with a potential threat, the rabbit may freeze and observe, and then tend to warn others in the warren by powerful thumps with the hind feet. And but in addition to being susceptible to predators, they're also susceptible to a variety of bacteria, viruses, and parasites. So again, unfortunately, rabbits and hares are very low on the food chain. This is showing a young fox that's actually caught a rabbit. So common predators, again, of hares and rabbits are fox, bobcats, coyotes, lynx, fishers, owls, hawks, mink, weasels, and again, cats, dogs, and humans. And hares tend to escape predators by outrunning them, but rabbits are much slower and they'll tend to try to seek cover to avoid predators. The hare's white color, as we mentioned in winter, helps them avoid predators, but rabbits are much more visible in winter and very vulnerable to predators. Rabbits can transmit some diseases to humans, like pastorella, tularemia, ringworm, and herpes. So you don't want to handle wild rabbits. Rabbit fever is the bacterial disease tularemia, and that's increased significantly in the past decade. But rabbit fever, even though it's called rabbit fever, most cases in New Hampshire are actually spread via ticks or deer flies, but it can be transmitted to humans by skin contact with infected rabbits or hares or rodents in general. And another possible route of transmission of tularemia is if you're out mowing lawn over nests of animals that have been affected with the disease, you can produce an aerosol that contains the bacteria, and the unwitting gardener can become infected by that aerosol. Symptoms that you would see with tularemia are high fever, and specific signs would depend on the route of infection. You might see skin ulcers, mouth ulcers, or a sore throat, amongst other things. So Eastman is not the greatest habitat for rabbits and hares. That's because we basically have a very mature forest and we lack some of the underground sort of understory that's really needed for most rabbits and hares. But we probably do have some eastern cottontails here, and we definitely have snowshoe hares. And we seldom see them because they're most active at dusk, dawn, and at night. But we know they're there because we see the snowshoe hare tracks in the snow. And we may also see some low plants that had that characteristic clean cut browse pattern on them. And we might see some rabbit scat. And we might see evidence that one of our many predators actually found a rabbit or a hare here. So that's a little bit about rabbits and hares. We hope that you've gotten something out of this and come back again.